Hello again. Jeremy and Wendy Myers here for another discussion of Adventures in Fishing for Men. And I'm sorry, I need to tell you in the last part of the previous video I was wrong. I made a mistake. Yep. This chapter is not the one that was not in the first edition. It's the next chapter, chapter 9. So I saw the title, Hooked on Fishing, and I thought it was this chapter, An Expensive Lesson in Hooking. So anyway, that will be the next chapter that is funny and was not in the first edition, but is in this second edition. In this chapter, what happens is the man decides, after watching the boys the previous day catch a fish on the river, and they were doing it by casting their line into the water and then reeling it back, he figures he needs to practice his casting. So he's out casting. Oh, and he also decided that the reason they caught such a small fish is because they used a small hook, small lure. So he wants a big fish, so he gets the biggest hook he can find, the biggest lure he can find. And so he's out casting, and it's sort of humorous in the fact that you don't know at first that he's not out on the river, because he's just out there and he's enjoying nature and he's casting. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, his neighbor shows up. Hey there, neighbor, what's going on? And you realize the fisherman is back in his backyard. And that's where he's practicing his casting. He still is not going to go down to the river where the fish actually are. And what happens is the man, the neighbor, makes some suggestions on his casting technique. What kinds of hooks he should and should not be using. He shouldn't be using this big giant hook and some other things. And the man gets pretty offended because, I'm the fisherman. Who are you to be giving me advice? And in the study guide and back, I indicate that this is the first time in the book where we get the idea that maybe the neighbor knows more about fishing than he's letting on. All right? So, because he seems to know something here about casting technique and the type of fish to use and so on. And what ends up happening is the man is casting with this giant hook, and it gets caught in his ear, and he utters the greatest curse word he could possibly utter. For him, it's crap. Strongest cuss word I would allow myself to say. I was very disciplined. And then this neighbor, though, helps him out and decides to take him to the hospital, gets him in his car. Meanwhile, the man thinks it's all the neighbor's fault because he interrupted me and he gave me bad advice even though I didn't follow it, and it's all his fault. And he even intentionally bleeds on the man's car, nice. Ruins his property because it's his fault and he deserves it. And then they get to the hospital and he gets the hook taken out by the doctor. And right at the end of the chapter he says, "After I was all bandaged up, my neighbor drove me home. He never did apologize. Didn't even offer to pay the medical bill. But at least he didn't ask any more questions. At least for now." So that's the chapter. And Wendy, just a few things of note in the chapter really that I was trying to point out when I wrote this. The first thing really is I didn't really mention it in the summary there, but when his neighbor's looking at this big giant hook, he says, "That thing is wicked." He's using a term to describe the hook. It's big, it's vicious, it's wicked. And the man says, "No, liars and thieves are wicked." And it's sort of an odd thing that I sometimes run into with Christians, where we always feel like we need to correct other people on their use of terminology. It's so often for me, I even find this at work sometimes. I tell someone, "Hey, you're really good at this." And they always seem to say they need to do this super hyper over spiritualizing thing where they say, "Only God is good." Like, come on, It's sort of like what this guy does. "Oh no, liars and thieves are wicked." And it's just this idea where the man's trying to look super spiritual to his neighbor, and he just makes him look like a hypocrite, really, because he's acting just horrible himself. Then he blames his neighbor. It's 100% his fault because he's ignorant. He doesn't know what he's doing, and he blames his neighbor. And we Christians do that all the time as well, blaming others. condemning others for the things we ourselves are guilty of, but we don't want to admit, we don't want to see. And anyway, I've talked too much, but that's just sort of some of the ideas in this chapter that I want us to watch out for as we interact with others in the world. What do you get from the chapter? Anything?
I don't really have anything else. Yeah. I think my biggest pet peeve with Christians is how they don't apologize. I can almost, well, you can always, no. I've never gotten this wrong yet. A church-going Christian doesn't seem to know how to apologize. We've run into this with our own family, with our own churches. Jeremy and I have had to stand in front of an entire congregation and apologize for things we never did. 100% never did. Because it was the only thing that would shut the giver of the church up.
The one with all the money.
So he needed to see an apology. He needed a scapegoat. If you've read any of the other stuff of Jeremy's written, he needed a scapegoat. And we were the scapegoat for his actions. And that's happened to us on numerous occasions with Jeremy's family and with my family. We seem to be the scapegoats of everybody. And I think once you're a scapegoat once, everybody else thinks they can just pile on their scapegoatness to you. And it gets old. So, I mean, I guess I'd ask every one of you that are reading this, look into your own lives and see if you've ever done that to somebody, because it's pretty miserable.
Think if you're ever, and the tricky thing is, in this case, the man thought he hadn't done anything wrong, and he thought the neighbor was the one who had done everything wrong, and so therefore the neighbor needed to apologize to him. How would a Christian get to know that they're the one that has done something wrong? And I think that that's the key. If you're ever in the situation where you think the other person is completely at fault and I am completely right, and they owe me an apology, it's not always the case, because sometimes that does happen. But
sometimes.
Watch out for that, because that should be a big red flag that maybe, most likely, there might be something that you need to apologize for.
Well, and I think that the times that it's happened to us, something has gone wrong and a couple weeks have gone by and nobody's been condemned of anything, and then all of a sudden we are.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's another thing, is when it takes you 2 weeks to figure out who's wrong, it's most likely yourself. And you're just trying to find a way to rationalize into blaming it on someone else.
It's a definite sign of the scapegoating.
Yeah.
Someone else is completely wrong. And it takes a while to get there.
You know,
trying to solve a conflict by blaming somebody.
Right. And someone comes up to you and you're like, 2 weeks ago. You're like, 2 weeks ago? Don't you remember when you were... No.
Yeah. So, look, Christians should be the first to apologize when we've wronged somebody.
Yeah.
And there's no harm or hurt. It doesn't cost us anything.
That's what we
often
teach our girls.
Tell our girls. It doesn't cost you anything to say you're sorry. You know, even if it wasn't your fault and someone else got hurt, or it was a mistake, if it was a mistake, you can still apologize, because it makes the other person feel better, that someone has noticed and someone that they know that you're in pain.
Well, because it ruins the relationship too. And I mean, we don't have relationships that are great with that church or either of our families, because there's only so much time we care to spend around people that are going to blame us for things we didn't do. And so, yeah, what we teach our girls is through example. You know, the girls will have an argument and I'll come up and hear them and I'll be like, you know what, I want to apologize for, you know, snapping at you, Taylor, this morning, because I'm sure that didn't go well with you, and now you're snapping at your sister. And so I'm partly to blame for your attitude towards her. You know, I'm trying to set an example that it really costs nothing to apologize. It actually costs so much to not apologize.
Yeah. Costs relationships and friendships.
And I don't want to lose a relationship for even one day with my girls. So if it takes me to say, I'm sorry, I probably snapped at you and I was in the middle of 3 things and I didn't realize I was doing it, I'm so sorry, changes their behavior like that.
Yep. Yeah, be more ready to apologize than to demand apologies from others. Yeah. That's sort of what we see here in the book. He was in the wrong the whole way. He's expecting, demanding that his neighbor apologize, or the neighbor didn't even do anything wrong.
No, the neighbor was just there to help him. The neighbor was there in the wrong place at the wrong time, which is pretty much where we always were in those situations where we were. Yeah.
Yep. So, okay, I don't have anything more on that chapter 8. Chapter 9 then is the one that I found funny. So we'll see you there in the next lesson. Okay, thanks.